Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is a book review and recommendation, and the book I will be reviewing is Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright. So before I jump into that, I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer. There have been motorcycles going round and round my street. So if it picks up on the microphone, my apologies. I was hoping it would die down, but no such luck. So we'll see how it goes. But anyway, so let's see who is here before I dump in. Oh gosh, I'm messing up already. Before I dive into the book, I was trying to say jump and dive right at the same time, and it just wasn't happening. Happy Monday. Hey Capone. Hey Renee. James Watson. Tony Wright. Thank you for joining. Hey Capone, as again, now you're getting right with the catitude comments. So, hey Greg, oh my God, Craig, it is really Monday, y'all. I am just butchering words left and right. So this is gonna be a fun episode. Lil Milky, Kane, oh my God, yeah, for real, for a lot of us. So for this book, so I'm really excited to discuss it. So thank you, Tony, for the book. So this book, I have to say, is actually the first one that I read on my phone or on my computer. Y'all know I'm super old-fashioned with like an actual book, and this was very different for me. So progress. I'm coming into the 21st century. So I don't have one to pick up and show, but I did do a picture of it on the thumbnail as big as it would allow me. And then I did a picture of it on my Instagram account. So definitely check that out. This is a case that when I go back to my spreadsheet of recommendations from you guys, this case has been requested multiple times that you guys have wanted me to cover. But with that being said, I only cover, when I do case reviews, solved cases, just strictly for my own OCD. I like a beginning, a middle, and then an ending for closure. But with this case, it's still very much unsolved. So what I thought would be a great way to kind of work this into the way you guys might like to see it is to do a review of the book as well as talk about the case as the author describes it. So you guys are kind of getting a 2-for-1. You're learning about the case, and also I will be reviewing the book kind of as we go along, giving my input as we go along, and then at the very end, I will do kind of a summary of what I think of the book. So it might be a little bit of a long episode, but that's all right. And especially if you don't know this case, then I'm hoping you guys learn something and enjoy it. I learned quite a bit from reading this book, so I'm very excited to share that with you guys. And if I butcher any names of any locations or names of any people, I apologize. I genuinely went through and tried to make sure that I got the pronunciations right, but you never know with me. So let's see, a few people have kind of come in as well as we've started. Hey, Undercover Mermaid, welcome. Duda Man, thank you. Good to see you as well. Mr. Jinx. What is this? I have OCD, literally. Well, who doesn't today, Hello, George. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Welcome. Okay, butchering words. Okay, that's me putting it nicely. I'm horrible at pronunciation. Thank you for giving me not even the tiniest little bit of credit. So, okay, we have a lot to go through. So let's kind of unpack this. So just a disclaimer as well. So I'll be throwing a lot of information at you guys as I kind of go through this review, but also just keep in mind, it's only a fraction of what's in the book. So if you guys want to learn more, or if there's a particular thing that I cover and you're thinking, gee, I wish I knew a bit more about that, it's in the book, trust me. And just in the interest of keeping this under hopefully an hour and a half, 2 hours. Other than that, I mean, I could have done a show on each chapter in the book. There's just that much information. So just wanted to make sure you guys know that. Hey, Kane. Yeah. Yes, I'm not Kane. Are you familiar with this case at all, or is this going to be new for you? Let me know. Hi, Dave. Good to see you. Long time no see. It is a fantastic book. Yes. Yes. And I will say that at the end as well. But yes, it is. So, all right. So, the intro to the book itself, there is quite a long introduction, but it covers a lot and absolutely nails what will be discussed in the book. What I did was just kind of pick different parts of the intro that I thought would sum this up for you guys. So, on February 24th, 1978, Ted Ware, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias left the Yuba County, California area to attend a college basketball game in Chico, California. It was a relatively easy 50-mile drive, and the five men had reportedly made the trip previously without incident. But on that February night, they never returned home. The friends were traveling in Jack Madruga's Pride and Joy, which was a 1969 light blue two-door Mercury Montego. Sometime after 11 p.m., the car became stuck on a desolate snow-covered road in the Plumas National Forest, situated in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The location was 60 miles in the wrong direction from where they lived. Where Madruga, Sterling, Hewitt, and Mathias emerged from the vehicle and disappeared into the frigid darkness of an unforgiving land. They were never seen alive again. Where Madruga, Sterling, and Hewitt were considered intellectually disabled, while Mathias had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The five collectively were known as, quote, the boys, end quote. They were all adults who lived with their parents, held jobs, and were incredibly passionate about sports, especially basketball. The families, the members of law enforcement who worked on the case, and the media reported the story, and those who have had an interest in the disappearance have been frustrated and heartbroken for nearly 45 years. The story about the disappearance of Ware, Madruga, Sterling, Hewitt, and Mathias became known as the case as the Yuba County Five. The story of the five saw sporadic national and local reporting until the end of 1979. And from that point forward, the news story was nothing more than a distant memory buried in newspapers until recently. So again, that's just a bit of a fraction of the introduction. The author then, when he starts the book, discusses how he became interested in the case. And this was actually after he saw something about it on YouTube in 2018. So what he says is, my goal was to do a proper deep dive into one of the most intriguing disappearances in American history. Most importantly, I wanted the stories of Ted Ware, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias shared with the world. It is important that people knew the five as individuals and as a group of friends. And I have to say that could not be more accurate in this book. And I'll get to that later on as the book unfolds and covers each of the individuals. But from a true crime reader's perspective, y'all know I am a self-proclaimed book nerd. I read a lot, and I read a lot of true crime. Not a lot of books cover the case from a victim standpoint in such length and in such detail as this book. I absolutely have to say, hands down. The only other book I can think of offhand, one that I recently reviewed for you guys was Kathy Kleiner's book, A Light in the Dark. She had survived Ted Bundy, and she made it her point to make sure that the victims had more than just a paragraph that people typically see when they read true crime. And she did an excellent job in her book with that. This book, I have to say, in regards to these five individuals, not only are they themselves discussed throughout the book, they actually have their own chapters, and I'll get to that later on. But again, from a victim's standpoint, this book is very much unlike any others I've read because it's incredibly victim focused, which I think is absolutely amazing and phenomenal. And it's not really done a ton in true crime books, from what I read, I have to say. So, and I'll be kind of jumping back and forth in the chat to kind of see where you guys are, just kind of, I have breaking points here. So There are photos in the book as well of each of the 5 men, and I thought that was really great for context because, again, this is an unsolved case that goes back over 45 years. I had been very, honestly, briefly familiar with the case, and it's just been on the back burner. So rereading this and getting to see the photos of the individuals, and again, to put a face to a name, was incredibly helpful. And the pictures were really great quality as well. So you really got to see the individual men for who they were. So keep that in mind. There was also a map of the area. And for me, not knowing anything about the area that's being described in the book, that map was super, super helpful because it laid everything out so you could see on the map where certain key locations were as they get discussed later in the book. So I did, because I'm not that great with maps, did go back several times as I was reading to see, okay, so this is where we were talking about. Now we're over here location-wise. And that was great context for me, which I think might be helpful for you guys as well, especially, again, if you're not from this area. So I see Danny, I'm a big book nerd too. Yes. Proud. Let's see. You don't know much about this one. Okay, that's good to know. Capone says he saw the Yuba County Five open for the West Memphis back at the. Okay. Band stuff is not quite my thing in regards to that. Sam Smith should be coming too. He always pops in at the end, so don't worry about Sam. So, okay, so the author, while working on this book, so Tony did a lot of research on each of these men. Again, he actually has a full chapter dedicated to each of them, and it shows just how much research he did on each individual. And again, I thought this was great. And he also described that he made sure to get a better understanding of intellectual disabilities and mental illness, because that plays such a key part in this case. And not only that, but it's great to get an understanding of how mental illness and disabilities was perceived back 45 years ago, because it's one thing to get an idea of how it's viewed now, which depending on where you live, it's still very different. But 45 years ago, totally different way of life in regards to how it was viewed. So the author really made sure to not only get a good understanding, and that comes through in this book, of those disabilities, but how they were viewed back then and how society viewed them back then. So, quote, while Gary Mathias was diagnosed with schizophrenia, there was not a clear diagnosis for Ware, Madruga, Sterling, or Hewitt. All 4 were rubber stamped as disabled, end quote. The author goes on to say, quote, family members clarified the disabilities of the 4 to the best of their abilities, but they wish they had an actual diagnosis at the time, end quote. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Over 45 years ago, there were so many either people that went undiagnosed or possibly even misdiagnosed. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as the case unfolds, again, because it plays a huge part in this. So, Capone. Oh, now I remember the case. You know what, Capone? I'm glad you made that connection now as opposed to like an hour in. So thank you for that. So during the 1960s and 70s, Yuba County and neighboring Sutter County provided certain services for the 5 men, and they were part of a program called the Gateway Projects. We will get into what the Gateway Projects were later in detail, but just for context, so you have a little bit of an idea and I don't leave you hanging too much. It was a nonprofit that allowed people with disabilities and those living with mental illness to earn job skills through training centers. So let's see. So George says Jack, Doc Madruga was the driver. The driver of the car was my uncle. Yes, George. Yes, thank you. Oh, thank you for being here. Oh my God, I'm actually very nervous that you're here, to be perfectly honest. But no, I'm really, really glad you're here. So I don't have my other YouTube link open to give you a wrench, so that's just in case you wanted to post links to anything. But I'll make sure to do that after the show. But give you a star for that comment. Thank you for being here. So, all right. So again, there are chapters for each of the 5 men, as I mentioned. The stories that they're given connect to their disappearance, but I want to say again, the author does a phenomenal job giving information as much as he could gather about each man individually. And the author also connects the families with each other, because a lot of these stories with these men, they weren't just 5 individuals, they were 5 individuals who were friends and whose lives overlapped in so many ways. So it would make sense that the families, then a lot of their stories would overlap. And again, the people that the author was able to interview were family members and those who knew the 5 men best. So let's just go ahead and dive into each of the guys individually. So Theodore Ted Ware. So Ted was the oldest member of the Yuba County Five and was remembered as a kind but fun-loving individual. He was active and was known to walk all over town. He could walk 4 miles. He owned a beachcomber-style bicycle with a basket in the front. Pepsi was his drink of choice, and the fridge always had to be stocked with it, or the Ware household would not hear the end of it. I liked that little detail in the book personally. However, quote, common sense eluded him, end quote, said Dallas Ware Jr. when asked about his uncle's faculties. An example of this was given in the book from Tony, the author, in 1967, when the family home caught fire. The family had to get Ted out of his bedroom. The flames had covered the ceiling of his bedroom, and he could not understand the commotion and was more interested in just getting a good night's sleep because he had to be at work the next morning. So the result of this was that he was forcibly dragged from the burning premises by one of his brothers. So around the time that he went missing, Ted was a laborer for Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, in the area. He also worked involving packaging, winding, and repairing cable, and it was made possible with his involvement with the Gateway projects. So, all right, I'm going to move on to Jack Madruga. And my apologies if my Wi-Fi is a little shoddy. It's been like that lately, and I don't know why, but we're going to make the best of it. So, Jack Madruga. So in the book, it is described by Tony as Jack loves sports, basketball, and baseball. He was also a swimmer and enjoyed taking trips with family to a local spot for the day of swimming and relaxation. Jack was allegedly never diagnosed as having an intellectual disability, but was considered slow in his thought processes. Quote, he was a quiet guy. He was very sensitive and very smart too, end quote, said George Madruga Jr. That quote, that's one thing that never comes out, is he was smart. People assumed since he was so quiet that he was not all there, but he was extremely intelligent and fun-loving, end quote. Sometime before or during 1966, Jack received a notice in the mail that he had been drafted, and he spent roughly 2 years in the military. He earned money during his time in the Army, and he put those funds toward the purchase of a 2-door white over light blue 1969 Mercury Montego sedan. Not gonna lie, I had to Google that because I am not a car person, so I wanted to get a better understanding of what was going to be a central key figure in this. So again, I did do some Googling on that vehicle. So Jack would say that his car was his pride and joy, and he would take great care of his car. As he began hanging out with Ted Ware, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias, he became the official driver of the group. In 1975, Jack enrolled in the Gateway projects and was assigned to some work-related duties. By 1976, he was employed as a dishwasher at Sunsweet Growers in Yuba City for approximately 1 year. Following his termination at Sunsweet, he began receiving unemployment compensation. So before we go on to Bill, just want to double check on the chat. see. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome. Okay, y'all know who Jennifer is, which is great. Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining. So in regards to Bill, and again, I just want to also make sure you guys know I am condensing each paragraph here about each of the individuals. There are whole chapters dedicated, so you get quite a bit more of each individual and you really get a sense for them. But I at least want to give you guys a little bit of in a nutshell who these 5 men were. So Bill Sterling, he had graduated from Placer High School in Auburn, California. He was later employed at a restaurant at Beale Air Force Base, again, as a dishwasher. He loved basketball, enjoyed bowling, and would go out with Ted, Jack, and Jackie to bowl or play miniature golf. Bill was also an avid walker, and his mother told investigators that her son could easily cover 9 miles in a day because he walked at a very fast pace. He was a member of a bowling league known as the Pin Pickers. This was a team composed of individuals with disabilities. Another of Bill's interests was religion. The notes from the Yuba County Sheriff's Department states that Bill was involved in various churches in the area. Jackie Hewitt. Jackie was enrolled in a special education program in Eureka around the age of 7 or 8 and would continue in a similar program when the family moved to the Marysville area. He was close with his mom, and the family described him as, quote, very loving, caring, funny, nowhere near as slow as the papers and everybody else said, quote. He was a talented athlete and would join the family on various hunting and fishing trips and held his own like a pro. He enjoyed roller skating, mini golf, bowling, and basketball. He also spent time at a local lake water skiing. He had a reluctance to use a telephone because he did not understand the basics of how a telephone worked. And that detail was described a bit more in depth in the book, because at first I was like, I don't quite follow, but then the author describes more and you're like, oh, okay, I understand where he might have had some struggles with really understanding the concept of that, but that will get played onto later in the book. And Jackie as well enrolled in the Gateway Projects in 1974. Drew's sister, I told him to join us. Okay. So Gary Mathias. So Gary got a lot of negative attention after the men went missing because he was diagnosed schizophrenic. So many people assumed that he clearly must have been involved or had something to do with it. And reading about that throughout the book, that was one of, for me as a reader, the really frustrating parts of how law enforcement and I guess society as well would just jump to that conclusion. And I really tried to make sure I didn't look at this case, in 2024 goggles, that, this was 45 years ago and times were different. But at the same time, with law enforcement, I don't really feel things have evolved that greatly where could that be an assumption that, law enforcement might make today? They very well may. But back then, to kind of read this, it just, as a reader, I got so angry because I'm thinking, it doesn't have, you don't need to jump to that. This were a group of friends, a group of 5 friends who really cared for each other. So to just automatically jump to that and kind of read that throughout the book as to why that was, that was one of the things that made me so angry at reading this with the law enforcement and society back then. I'm like, come on, no, move. Spend the time focusing on who might have actually done this, but I digress. So again, a lot of people assumed that he had to have something to do with it because of his diagnosis. So we learn about Gary, though, besides his schizophrenia diagnosis. In his early years of life, he was full of youthful mischief, adventure. He loved Superman. When he attended Marysville High School, he was the lead singer of a rock and roll band called the Fifth Shade, and they performed covers of popular music at the times. Gary would play harmonica. He was also an athlete at Marysville High School. He played football. He spent time bowling, going roller skating, and enjoying time in the snow. He had a full list of things and hobbies that he did. Months after graduation from high school in 1971, Gary decided to enlist in the Army. He was stationed in West Germany, and he may have been a supply clerk. During his stint, Gary was suspected by the Army of being under the influence of drugs, and he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. The Army sent Gary back to California sometime in 1972 for hospitalization at the Letterman Army Hospital in the Presidio in San Francisco because of suspected drug use. He had over the years several run-ins with the law as well as several hospitalizations. So the Gateway Projects, I know I touched upon that a little earlier and I said we would get back to that. And I think that's a good point here to kind of give you guys more context about this program because the men were so involved in it. And just to kind of make you guys think, as well as for myself, what agencies that you might think are like that now in your area where you live. This to me seems like a 1 in a million agency for this time period for this area, where nowadays there seems to be quite a bit more nonprofits or, services through, different, local health centers where people are able to get, especially job training or whatnot if they have a disability or an illness. But back then, the Gateway Projects, the author goes a lot into the history of the Gateway Projects and how it was developed within the community. There was a long time where it was considered not safe as there were attacks and a murder. And yes, the author, Tony, does get into that in the book. So that's something to look at in itself, which I found very interesting. But as you read on about the history, you get to the point where when these 5 men had joined the group, it was back on track. So the Gateway Projects was back to its original mission of serving the community. Hi, Kathy. Welcome. Thank you for joining. So the Gateway Projects, again, their goal was to train people with disabilities and mental illness so they could get and hold a job. They also provided education to those who were part of the program. I have to say, they really seem to offer a good wraparound type of service to the clients that they were serving. And I'm just giving you guys a summary of it. There were much, much more that is described in the book of what they did. But again, for 45 years ago, very impressive work that this agency was doing. So those who were interested in being part of the Gateway Projects had to undergo a series of tests, physical, mental, to determine if they'd be a good fit. Some individuals are required to be part of a trainee work evaluation program where they would be closely monitored. It was important that the trainees would be able to work well with their coworkers and supervisors. Makes sense. You want to set them up for success. People who became part of the Gateway were generally referred by state area mental health clinics, or some were even referred to by county probation departments. Education sessions were developed to build confidence in the trainees because many of them came from a world where they were told they could not do this or they could not do that because they were disabled or they had mental illness. At the Gateway Project, there was a basketball team known as the Gateway Gators. And the 5 men that we are discussing in this book, not only were they members of the team, but again, as a group, they were actually friends and spent time outside of that Gateway Project together. And they would practice basketball regularly for this. Hi, UFO. Oh, long time no see. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well too. So here we get, now that we have a background of the individuals and a little bit of the organization that they belong to, now we're getting into the night that they go missing. And again, I'm just kind of summing up here a lot of great information that's in the book, but I just wanted to, again, since this was a case that you guys had really wanted me to cover, you're going to be getting a little bit of that as well as my thoughts on the book on this. So now we jump to February 24th, 1978. So Ted, Jack, Bill, Jackie, and Gary were fans of the UC Davis Aggies Aggies. Oh my God. You can tell I'm not a sports person. Aggies, men's basketball team. That night they were playing at Chico State. The guys were excited to go and cheer them on that evening. The guys also had a big tournament the next day for their Gateway Gators team. So back to the Chico State game, right? Well, their team won. The game ended sometime before 10 p.m. and the Five decided it was time to celebrate. So they went to a market for snacks that was located in Chico. It was about 8 minutes from the gymnasium, so very, very close. At this point, what the five men did is really just speculation. But as reported here in the book, so they got into Jack's car, took Highway 99 out of Chico. It would split northwest of Oroville, and there were two options to go home, right? If they continued on Highway 99, it would have sent them directly back to Yuba City to drop off Bill at his home. From there, Jack would have gone east toward the Maryville area to drop off Ted, Jackie, and Gary. The other highway, California 70, would have led them directly back to the Marysville area. Both 99 and 70 run parallel to each other and would have brought the Five back home safe and sound. Again, those two options. However, at some point, Jack's car ended up in Oroville. Jack then took the Oroville-Quincy Highway northeast into the Plumas National Forest. This was the wrong direction from the home. Again, there were two directions they could have gone and everything could have gone smoothly. He went a different direction. The roads in the Plumas were not paved in spots. Plus, they were driving into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, where they would encounter higher elevations and snow. So Jack drove up a dirt road near a place called Rogers Cow Camp. They would have driven an estimated 1 hour and 15 minutes to get from Chico to the Rogers Cow Camp area. Well, Jack's car ended up being stuck in the snow at the road line, and the men exited the car. The men not coming home that night was completely out of character for all of them. So naturally, their families worried. Melba Madruga tried to report the five men missing early on February 25th, but was told to wait 24 hours before making a report. The men, after all, were all over 18 years old. Well, offense report number 78-534 was created on February 25th, 1978, when Melba Madruga called the Yuba County Sheriff's Department again at 8 p.m. Deputy Jim Harris and Reserve Deputy Jess Loftus were initially assigned to the case. 5 adult men with disabilities were missing and had not been seen by their families since 6 p.m. on Friday. I know this is one of those things that is constantly talked about in true crime, when maybe it hasn't been 24 hours and a loved one is missing. They are over 18 years old, but something happens that's out of character for that individual. And families know that. Loved ones know that. People who are close, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, you know when something is off, when something's not right, and the person that you're caring about is maybe they're not there, and that's out of character for them. And when you're multiplying that by 5 men, where they all of their families were wondering in where they are, this is out of character. I think that says something. Am I shocked that law enforcement made them wait 24 hours? I'm not. But again, this is one of those things in true crime where it's just something's not right. You know, this is out of character for this person. If something was initiated a little sooner, could there have been a different result? That's the age-old question, right? Well, the men had some particular traits that made the case detail very interesting. Again, we all have our own set of, consistent things we do in day-to-day routines, right? And when we deviate from the norm, our loved ones, they know that. So, for example, Ted was set on being in bed at a certain time. Jack was set on going from point A to point B and would not tolerate backseat drivers, changing the course of his journey. Some of the men were not comfortable being in a location that was dark, which was the case for the Plumas. And the men knew where to avoid the cold and the snow. So everything about this evening was incredibly out of character for all 5 men. So, all right, jumping to the next part here. So before the author went into discussing the investigation, he discusses the actual Yuba County Sheriff's Department themselves in regards to who worked there at the time, their backgrounds, as well as local politics at the time that would have impacted this department. So again, he goes into quite a bit of a detail with that. I don't necessarily do that in my review here, but I think that sheds a lot of light, I would say, on how the case was approached, or how, again, we see this time and time again, how that does impact a case being approached. But again, you can get more details in that in the book. So once the investigation into the men did start, the families started to do their own searches as well. So the Yuba County Sheriff's Department spent Monday, February 27th and Tuesday, February 28th, 1978, interviewing the family of the missing men and gathering as much information as they could about the 5 men. The media had reported the story by this time, and it had started to spread, and leads were coming in regarding possible sightings. So again, anytime there's a possible sighting, law enforcement needs to follow up on that. And a lot of times, depending on where these sightings were some in the area? Yes. Were some out of the area? Yes. But again, law enforcement had to follow up on all of those. So early articles written about the disappearance. This was one of those things where I was reading it and I was just, again, as a reader, getting so just frustrated at the time. And if y'all hear the motorcycles, I can hear them. I hope they're not picking up on the microphone. They're going by again. But so the term that was used when the men were missing were, quote, that they were slightly retarded, end quote. And this was the term used to describe the missing men from that point forward. The use of the word, quote, retarded, end quote, may have been accepted by some during this time, and it may also have been used to bring some urgency to the case. Other articles would refer to the terms used to describe the men as, quote, slightly disabled, end quote, or, quote, handicapped, end quote. But again, just you would never see at this point in time in 2024, the R word being used to describe a missing individual. That would never happen. But back then, again, you can see why it was allowed and why it was tolerated. Again, 45 years ago, very different way of life. Hi, Tony. Welcome. Good to see you. No, it is not the straight Satan's driving by. I assure you that. But thank you for your concern and speculation there. So a family member of the 5 had told reporters that the men did a good job in handling themselves in normal circumstances. But once a situation turned stressful, they became nervous and childlike. So on February 27th, 1978, Willard Burris was a U.S. Forest Service worker at the Plumas National Forest and made a discovery on an unpaved road near Rogers Cow Camp while marking timber. He discovered in 1969 Mercury Montego, quote, was parked in the middle of the road. It looked like it had been stuck in the snow a couple of days, end quote. So Rogers Cow Camp was located about 4,200 feet above sea level in the Plumas National Forest. To get there, one had to take the Oroville-Quincy Highway from Oroville, which is located off of Highway 70. Again, we discussed the different directions that the men could have gone that night and discussed that location. And if you're horrible at directions, like me, again, there's a great map in the book, so it lays it all out for you. So the vehicle was stuck in the middle of the road some 100 yards away from where the road had to be closed due to the snow. So basically all 5 men basically ended up in the middle of nowhere, quite simply. So photographs were taken and the car was examined. So the car was Jack Machuca's car. So what they found was a milk carton, a Pepsi bottle, snack wrappers, and a newspaper. Again, some of the items in the car. A program from the basketball game was also in the car, and investigators noticed someone had written down some scoring statistics. One of the windows was partially rolled down as well. The keys were not in the vehicle, but the car did start when investigators hotwired it. The car had a quarter tank of gas, and the car could have easily been moved. There was also no damage to the underside of the vehicle. Now, a man named Joseph Shawns came forward to report he saw the five on that night, February 24th, because he too was stuck on the same road. His car was also stuck in the snow, and when he tried pushing the car free, he suffered a heart attack. He said he noticed the men's car pull up to the road sometime after 11 p.m. that evening. Joseph called out for help. The men got out, but they didn't help him. Instead, they went into the forest. So you might think this is great. There was somebody who witnessed the men. He might be able to give some insight. However, slow it down. The book then focuses quite a lot on Joseph. It goes over his background, which is super important for context in describing him. And Joseph is a known liar. He had prior legal trouble, and even the details of his story don't add up and they don't make sense once you really start to unravel it. And this, hey, Wolf, yes, this is a very interesting case, absolutely. So the true crime person in me here, when I came to this chapter in the book, I was like, all right. It is not uncommon, and this is just my opinion, it is not uncommon for people who are involved in a crime to insert themselves into the search, any investigation that's going on, because they want to keep an eye on what law enforcement knows. And if they insert themselves in some minimal way, offer assistance or whatnot, their foot's in the door, so to speak. And it's also, again, from a psychology point of view, it's one of those, a lot of times it's because these individuals think they're the smartest person in the room. But again, my mind first went to that when I was reading about Joseph. I took it as, again, his story wasn't adding up. When you start to look at it, it dismantles very quickly. So I would not be surprised if, again, someone is now inserting themselves into the case who may have a greater knowledge than what they're leading on to investigators. But that's just my 2 cents on that, how I followed it as I went. So next in the book, so Tony, the author, goes into the detail about where the vehicle was found. And that's super important as well, because the Plumas National Forest is a huge mountainous region with the Cascades to the north and the Sierra Nevada to the south. Elevations range from 3,000 to 8,000 feet, and recreational activities there include a variety of things: hiking, fishing, hunting, skiing, and snowmobiling. Visitors enjoy camping, and they have access to some 20 lakes. Again, 20 lakes. So this is a huge area here, right? So the problem is here that these 5 men vanished. They disappeared during the winter below freezing temperatures. There was rain and snow was constant. So the elements were definitely stacked against them. As we can imagine, when the men were reporting missing, especially now that Jack's vehicle was found, search groups were formed to try to help find the missing men. Jack's car was towed to Brower's Body Shop in Oroville for analysis. And I know I mentioned several of the things that detectives had found when they examined the car. And one of the things that was found was there were stains on the driver's side sun visor. The sheriff's department removed the visor and used test strips on the stains. At first, the results showed it was blood, but it eventually came back negative. So it was basically a false positive. Footprints were discovered by Jack's car, and they appeared to have been by a group of individuals. The issue is that by the time the footprints were found, snow had started to melt. So investigators couldn't determine whether those footprints were either going towards the vehicle or going away from the vehicle. So that was a missed opportunity. Early in the investigation, the law enforcement told the press that they did not believe Jack drove his car to that location just coincidentally. Quote, "You just don't take that road by accident. That's just not the kind of mistake anyone could make," end quote. And I completely agree with that. Again, I don't know the area, but based on the way the author lays everything out about this area, as well as the incredibly helpful map that I've referenced multiple times, you really get a sense of this just wasn't, you don't just accidentally end up there. There was time after time where the men could have stopped and turned around, and it was clear that they were heading in a direction where they shouldn't have been going. It was very crystal clear. So I agree with this, what law enforcement said here, that this just wouldn't have been an accident for them to end up there. Let's see, Wolf says, if they were smart enough to pass a road test, it seems like they would not fray from the road. It's rather mysterious why they left the vehicle. That's an excellent point, why they left that vehicle. We'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, exactly. This was, yeah, thank you, George. They definitely did not get lost. Absolutely. Absolutely. Best way to put that. So the men's families, they all agreed that the 5 men were capable of driving to Chico and then returning home safely. So again, them going missing, out of character and just not within the normal realm of possibilities here. This was completely out of the norm. So during the search, authorities had learned that Gary, he had some friends about 4 miles north of Brownsville in Forbes-town, California. Again, just to follow up on every lead, law enforcement contacted them. However, none of the friends had seen or been in contact with Gary or the others. So that was ruled out. Capone says, had any of them been in that area before? Good question. In regards to where the vehicle was, or in regards to just that mountainous area? Kane says they were lured away from their car. Well, that's one of the possibilities that we're going to be discussing. Yes. So where the vehicle was. There was nothing that I read in the book that the men had been to that specific spot where the vehicle was left. Because then that would have also played a part of that the men had been there and were familiar with the area, and that was never discussed in the case here. It wasn't discussed in the book, at least. So one of the things that investigators use the assistance of, and it goes into this quite a bit more in detail, but psychics. So Under Sheriff Jack Beecham had recalled that psychics had, quote, come out of the woodwork, end quote, to help with the case. In the end, that proved to not be of any use, but there comes a point in time where this was not the only case that I've researched where psychics have come in to try to be of some help. Sometimes it is helpful, sometimes it isn't, but at the end of the day, if somebody's coming forward with possible information, and especially where there's a missing case here, especially more than one individual, but 5, you know what, take the help. But yeah, in the end, none of them proved to be helpful in finding the individuals. So one of the great things here that the author discusses and was able to connect with other researchers and authors who had done books on the case as well. And he does give, again, credit where credit is due. So those books and authors are Drew Beeson's book, Out of Bounds, What Happened to the Yuba County Five, as well as Shannon McGarvey, researcher and writer for Mopec Audio's Yuba County 5 podcast, which I have now started to listen to because I am, yes, I need more. I need more details. And thus far, excellent podcast. So thank you, Tony, for that recommendation. Let's see. So family and friends of the missing men, they gave their thoughts at this point in the book as follows on what could have possibly happened to the men. And again, while this was going on, law enforcement was getting tips of people who were, quote unquote, having sightings of these men. The families of Ted, Jack, Jackie, and Gary were made aware of maps along with writings and markings in the vehicle. In the end, they didn't know about the map, so they couldn't really give any insight. North of where the car was found, there were strips of cloth that were located. Investigators believed they missed the cloth during the initial search area due to the snow depth at the time, which can make sense in that. So let's see. Hello, Gary was arguably the biggest victim in all of this. His name has been dragged through the mud since his disappearance. Well said. Well said. I'm not sure if you, earlier I made the comment that when I was reading this, I was just getting so angry because Gary was it was just an easy thing for law enforcement or for the community to just kind of quickly be like, oh, well, he must have been involved. He has mental illness. It must have been him. And that, very, very frustrating, very, very frustrating. And it just, again, to me as a reader, I'm reading this thinking it's just wasted opportunity and wasted time focusing on, what, to me, it's just, okay, that's an easy way out to just kind of assume that. But again, when focus could have been elsewhere. But you're absolutely right. Hello, Eduardo. Welcome. To make him the scapegoat because of his past. Absolutely. And the sad thing is, not much has changed based on now. I mean, that still happens. Maybe not as frequently, but it does still happen. And that's what's absolutely tragic in this, is that it's been 45 years. You'd think we as a society would have learned a little more. We have, but not caught up, because again, you could see this happen, a same scenario again and again in 2024, unfortunately. Drew Beeson's book is great. The Moped Park. Well, yes, I need to get that book. I don't have that book yet, but I did start listening to the podcast. Excellent. Excellent. So now we jump to June 4th, 1978, which is a Sunday. So 2 men and a 16-year-old son of one of the men did a motorcycle trip from Oroville to Quincy. They could have taken Highway 70, but decided to take a more scenic route through the Plumas National Forest. Their plan was to travel on the Oroville-Quincy Highway, and once they hit Quincy, they would enjoy a cup of coffee. From there, they would take another scenic route back home. The 3 would encounter snow and fallen trees on the roads as they made their way through the Plumas National Forest. They thought there wouldn't be any snow since it was early June. There was a section of road they encountered that had about 4 feet of snowdrifts, so there was no way to get around it, and they had to go a different route. So someone in the group decided to go back to the Daniel Zink campground area to see if anybody was around and if they could just ask for different directions. And then this is again, you can follow this very well on the map, but just so I can kind of lay this out so you guys have some context. So roughly 12 miles northeast of where Jack Madruga's car was abandoned was the Daniel Zink campground. The 12 miles are measured along the roads that link both locations. So if somebody was to walk the distance along the rugged terrain from Rogers Cow Camp to Daniel Zink, it would be 5 miles. So these 2 men and the 16-year-old son of one of them, they found the Daniel Zink campground deserted. There was a map at the campground that they could review and kind of figure out what would be the best way to get back to Quincy. However, they came across what would be described as a horrific smell. And it seemed to be coming from a 2x2 side Forest Service trailers, and they were each 8 by 30 feet. One of the trailers had a broken window. So one of the men was able to look inside and was able to look inside the window and then get inside the actual trailer. And at this point, discovered a body. Quote, he was on the bottom bunk right next to the window. I could literally reach into the window and touch him, end quote. And then went on to say, quote, it was badly decomposed. It appeared he just laid down and went to sleep. He was covered with a sheet about up to his neck, end quote. Well, the men and 16-year-old left to find a phone and call police. The three were able to meet up with the deputies so they could show them a map of where they could find this body. It had taken law enforcement, however, hours to get to the site due to some large trees that were blocking the road, but they did make it there and they did find the body. The Yuba County Sheriff's Department was contacted and they were going to send people up to the location the next day. So now, June 5th, 1978, the following day, so members of the Yuba, Butte, and Plumas County Sheriff's Departments entered the trailer to examine the remains of a deceased Caucasian male lying on his back in bed. The investigators noticed that the deceased was under 8 sheets, and they decided to lift up those sheets to review the body. They realized it was Ted Weir because he was wearing the same clothes that he was wearing when he went missing. However, Ted had lost a huge amount of weight and he had a full beard. His hair was unkempt and it was curly. This was different than when Ted went missing. He was clean shaven. And again, he lost a lot of weight from the time he went missing. His feet were also badly frostbitten. He had lost 3 toes from his right foot and 2 from his left. There was also an infection that resulted in the veins in his legs being discolored. They found identification on a table next to the bed where the body was located. A ring was also found on the table with the name Ted engraved in it, plus a neck chain and a wristwatch. The ring and the neck chain were Ted's, and he was wearing them when he disappeared. However, the wristwatch, that was not his. So law enforcement naturally examined the trailer for clues. And as the author goes into describing what they were seeing, a lot of it just doesn't, you hear that and you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then you read a few things more and you're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense either. So follow me on this. Follow me. It's not going to make sense. Danny, did you say early June they disappeared? No, early June was when they were starting to be discovered. The men disappeared February 24th, 1978. Okay. So let me do a quick pause first. I've been talking quite a bit. So when law enforcement examined the trailers, the window on the north side of the trailer had been broken from the outside, and they noticed that the door to the trailer was open. Empty C-ration cans were found outside the trailer window. I did not know what that was, so thank you to Tony for describing what that was in the book. C-rations were canned meals that were used by the military, which could be eaten heated or straight out of containers. So also in the trailer, there were several paperback books that were found outside the back door of the trailer. A white bed sheet and a white sock were found 30 feet away from the trailer. There was a candle in the trailer that had been lit at some point, but no attempt was made to really start any type of fire. The tennis shoes that Gary was wearing when he disappeared were found in the trailer, but the leather shoes that Ted was wearing when he went missing were nowhere to be found. So this is the first that we're hearing Gary's connection here. So again, his shoes that he was wearing when he disappeared were found in that trailer. Ted's was not. So the neighboring Forest Service trailer was examined. It appeared to have been ransacked. However, there was dehydrated food that had been untouched. A half mile to the northeast of the trailers, investigators found some blankets and a flashlight along the roadway. The Forest Service employees identified them as their property, and they would have been in their trailer. The investigators suspected the 2 other nearby trailers for additional clues. There was a tool shed that had been pried open, and someone had used a tool to try to, for the second shed, try to break the lock, but that wasn't successful. So one had been pried open, and on the other, someone had used a tool, wasn't able to break the lock. The other shed that they weren't able to get into had a generator inside. But again, it was clear, very clear, that someone had tried to use a file to cut that lock. Sorry, I couldn't hear with the AC blaring. No worries, no worries. So in the trailer where Ted was found were a couple of coal oil heating stoves. Nothing indicated that they were actually used. Heating cans were discovered with the sea rations. Those cans were filled with cooking fuel that could be used to heat food. They could have also provided some warmth in the trailer as well. There were matchbooks. They were unused. Investigators made the determination that it was very clear no attempt was made to start a fire to keep themselves warm or to start a fire to signal to searchers that they were lost or that they needed help and to be rescued. None of that occurred. So on June 6, 1978, around 10 a.m., the remains of Jack and Bill were discovered in the Granite Basin. This was located 3 miles down the road from the U.S. Forest Service trailer on the Daniel Zink campground. Jack was found on the northeast side of a roadway near a stream. He was badly decomposed, clutching a watch, and his remains appeared to have been picked at by animals. On him were the keys to his 1969 Mercury Montego. Bill was found across the road in a southwest line from Jack in an embankment. Animals had also scattered his remains over an area measuring 50 square yards. He was identified by the clothing that he was wearing the night he went missing, along with some personal items, including his wallet. So at this point, Jackie and Gary are still missing. The autopsy of Ted was completed. The cause of death was pulmonary congestion due to exposure. However, there was no signs of foul play. Jackie's father, so again, his son is still missing. He took time off work to go search for his son, boots on the ground searching, and his work allowed that. And from what I believe from remembering reading in the book, actually paid. So he was paid for his time off again to go try to find his son. Let's see. Hey, Royce. Good to see you. Thank you for joining. So Jack is out there. Jackie's father is out there trying to find his son. And he says, quote, "Here comes this guy up above walking through, beating the living shit out of his dog. He was with 4 or 5 dogs and he's beating the shit out of his dog. And I said, hey, what the hell are you doing? The man explained to Hewitt Sr. that the dog had a deer bone. It would not let it go. Jackie's father thought nothing of it at the time and went back to eating his sandwich. So the next day he returned again, searching for his son. It was a 1/4 mile from the trailers where Jackie's father ended up actually finding his son's remains. I just had absolute chills when I read this. So, quote, "I was the first one to spot it. When I seen that bone, naturally you're going to look at it to see if it's a deer bone or a human. Anybody could tell it was a leg bone from here down the hip because the ball joint was still there. And then I got 20 feet away and I found his pants with a billfold in it." End quote. So he then found the jacket that Jackie was wearing the night he disappeared. Oh my gosh. And this next part, he picked it up off the ground, and that is when something fell out of the jacket. It was his spine. It was his son's spine. There's so much in this book that just gets to your core. For me, that was one of those. I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. So the rest of Jackie's remains were scattered over an area northwest of the trailers. Searchers continued looking for other remains, and they would eventually locate Jackie's skull some 100 yards away. So the four families had now written obituaries and made funeral arrangements for their sons. Ted Ware was buried on June 8th. Jack Madruga was buried on June 9th. Bill Sterling was also buried on June 9th, and Jackie Hewitt was buried on June 11th. Jennifer's saying, that's the part that gets me every time. Yes, I completely hear you on that. That was just one, again, as I read it, I just feel that chill. Kane, absolutely. It's just heartbreaking. I mean, think of, the law enforcement that are searching. There are search parties that are, trying to find these men. And for him to find his son and in such a state that his son was in, it's just, no father should have to discover that ever. And unfortunately, in this case, he did. That's just one of the images from this book that I'll never be able to get out of my mind. But so I know I've thrown a lot at you guys here so far with details about the case again, and I'm just summing it up here. So there's much, much more, but there are so many questions in this case, right? Think about it. We have not talked about Gary yet. Where is Gary? We're going to get to that. But so far, again, so many questions. Why did the five take a straight path up the road into the Plumas? Quote, most people go downhill when they're lost, or they go in circles. Not a straight line like this. Had they walked south down the road, they would have come across Mountain House, end quote. So some of the victims' families believed someone forced Jack to drive up the road where his car was abandoned. The road where the car was abandoned was near Rogers Cow Camp. It was not paved, it was rutted, and it was a snow-covered area. It was not an easy drive. Again, and we're talking winter in February. So think about that. And then also think, just for perspective for myself, I found this helpful. Being from New England, weather could be, who knows? So snow in June, not out of the realm of possibilities. But for the snow to be how it was in June, when the three individuals made the discovery of, of the first man in this case, think of how much snow there was then. So think how much more snow there would have been in February. I really had to just step back and think of that, and just these five men were really talking about being out on a night where the elements were just working against you weather-wise. It was just the worst case weather-wise. And again, where the car was, it just didn't make sense. It was not an easy drive, and not just somewhere where you just happen to end up before you realize, hey, this isn't right. That wasn't what would happen here. Hi, David. Welcome. I see you guys are making a few comments. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Sire says, what was really infuriating for me was learning how some, if not all, the boys could have saved if someone had said to check those trailers. Absolutely. Absolutely. I know the case well, and you were doing a great job. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you. That means a lot. This is all Tony. This is Tony's book here. So thank you, Tony. Did a great job that I feel like, okay, I'm learning. Capone says, people have been doing nefarious things in state and national parks forever. Who know what they came across? Good point in regards to who know what they came across. But I think more so, just to build on that, is how they ended up there in the first place, though. And I think that's one of the huge questions. I see what you're saying, but it seems more in this case, especially with the elements of the weather at the time, how they ended up there. They wouldn't have just stumbled upon that and then stumbled upon something nefarious necessarily. Law enforcement dropped the ball by not searching those trailers. They knew they were there. Yeah, there was one comment, George, in the book, and I originally had it in my notes, and then I second guessed it, and I took it out. I wish I didn't, but since you say that, but it was one of those. It was a comment. I wish I knew the page number. My apologies, but it was law enforcement. They made a statement like, "Well, we did all we could," you know. Like one of those, oh, we missed that, it is like, it is what it is type of statement. I'm totally blanking, and I know Tony the author would know exactly what I was referring to, but I read that and I got really angry because I'm thinking, wait, what? Like, I feel for the most part, law enforcement, good law enforcement, even when they give 110%, they still have some remorse of, oh, if I just did that one extra thing, if I just looked in that one extra place, even though they clearly gave and gave. But in this case, it seemed, well, we didn't search all those places, but what can you do? It is what it is. That was the sense I got. And I was just like, wait a minute. Like there were missing men. Men have died. There are men whose lives were cut short because the search wasn't as effective as it could have been. So I didn't care for that. I wish I kept that quote. And I just thought, I was like, oh, it's going to come across like I'm bashing the police here. Now I wish I left it in, but I'm glad you brought that up, that they did drop the ball by not searching those trailers. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So in regards to, again, some of the questions that remain are the men, in regards to Jack's car being stuck, the men could have clearly worked together to get it unstuck and returned home. That was not done. When investigators found Jack's car, remember I mentioned early on that they found a window partially rolled down. Just an easy, minor detail that I mentioned along the way. Well, wait a minute. His family states, again, that vehicle was his pride and joy, and he never would have walked away from his vehicle with a window down. So again, a behavior that's out of character. There are so many steps here that are out of character behaviors or just things that aren't adding up, and that's one of them. And to me, that was a huge red flag. I looked at that when I read that as, okay, if this was somebody who took that much pride in their vehicle and would not have walked away with it being down, why did they walk away with it being down? I took it as they were being taken by somebody else or forced to leave that area, and he was not able to roll his vehicle window up. But again, because you got to look at, and we see this all the time, we all have our, my friends, my family, we all are kind of creatures of habit or routine, if you will, in some way, shape, or form, some more than others. But again, your family, your loved ones, your friends, your coworkers, they're going to know if something's amiss. And if something's amiss, and there's more than one thing with that one individual, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. That doesn't add up as well. Again, multiplied by five men here, there's a lot to question. There's a lot. So again, the families of each of the men were saying here what didn't make sense in what they learned about their loved one as details were being released. So as I mentioned, Gary Mathias, he was not found then. He has not been found to this day. Let's see where you guys are in the chat. I just didn't want to miss any comments. A bunch of, quote, retarded, end quote, men could have never made it that far. Well said, George. Absolutely. And okay, I'm really glad you say that because, okay, let me rant here for a second. I feel that in this case, reading, again, outside looking in, reading this, sometimes the media or law enforcement, you can't have it both ways, right? So you can't say that, okay, these men were so intellectually, disabled that they couldn't have done X, Y, and Z, but were able to get up there on their own. Like they were able to get up there and Gary was involved in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. I got that vibe from law enforcement kind of handling the case, especially when the two men in the 16-year-old found the first deceased male, which they didn't know at the time who it was. So that's why I say it that way. They didn't know who it was, didn't know that it was one of the missing five. Called law enforcement, again, went to get a phone to call. And in the book, so Tony, the author, states right there that law enforcement who took that initial call, they were skeptical, like, oh, okay. Like, and I'm thinking, wait, what? Again, 45 years ago, mountainous area. I don't know if prank calls like that were a common thing, because my first thought was, wait a minute, if somebody's calling and saying, I just came across a deceased person here in the woods, especially when law enforcement knows, hey, wait a minute, a few months ago there were 5 missing men somewhat in this area. That to me, just like, what do you mean the person who took the call was skeptical? Like, yeah. So the way law enforcement handled this case initially, I think there was a lot of lost opportunity. We hear about it all the time. The first 48 hours are so important when somebody goes missing, not just a child under 18, but when anybody goes missing. I mean, the first 24 hours are the most critical, but the first 48 are super important. And the first 24 hours were essentially a wash because police said, this person's over 18, you cannot file until 24 hours. For the persistence of families, 24 hours later saying, hey, I'm back, and I'm back to file this. And they did. At that point, law enforcement now had to do something, but 24 hours were lost. Those first 24 hours were lost. And that's just, you can't get that back. And look where the case is now. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Sorry, went a little bit of a rant. The thing for me is what sent them to the woods. Then why separate? Very good question. There's theories within the book, and I'll get to a little bit of that later, as to why that could have happened. If one person went for help and then didn't come back, then did the next person or two of them then go to try to get help after realizing, hey, no one's coming back. That's one of the theories. But again, why separate? Because they could have, if they stayed together and moved, they could have gotten that car out of that situation where the car was stuck. They easily could have done that, but that wasn't done. Yeah, so I don't know. Cyrus says, even if Gary had snapped, there's no way he could have caused this all by himself. Good point. Again, you had 5 people here. So 5 individuals. This was not a one-on-one thing where, if we're going with law enforcement, just hypothetically speaking, could one have done something to somebody else? We see that all the time. But it would have been 1 on 4. And it doesn't jive. Sounds like something frightened them, made them leave the car, or forced them. I think forced them. Gary was on his meds, and I don't believe he snapped. David says they bought candy and snacks, everything okay, then bam. I think someone saw them as an easy mark, followed them and forced them out, then panic set in. It's possibility, absolute possibility. And that's one of the things that I really like that Tony says right at the beginning of this book is, here's the facts that we know, and then a lot of the rest is just speculation based on details that we learned after the case. But yeah, one of the things we know was they did, they were in a great mood. Their team won. They wanted to celebrate. They went and got, snacks and candy and soda. And what happened where they went the opposite way home? They had two paths that they could have gone on, right? And I described that earlier on. They didn't do either. They went in, it was the opposite way, which doesn't make sense. Let's see. So, okay. I got into, we're starting to wind it down. We're getting there. So Gary Mathias. So again, to this day, he has never been found. Detectives and Gary's family believe he is not alive. There was discussion in the book in regard to the different theories, as we've been talking about throughout this entire show, of did Gary Mathias do it? Did he have a psychotic episode? Again, I think, based on a lot of what you guys are saying in the chat here, that no, he didn't do it. It's like you said, Jennifer, he was on his meds, so you don't believe that he snapped. But even still, again, my personal opinion on this is I think he was an easy scapegoat to look at because he was the only one that had an official kind of quote unquote diagnosis. So again, he was schizophrenic, so he would have been an easy person to look at. And I think it was Kane pointed out earlier that because of his background and, run-ins with law enforcement prior, nothing huge, but again, something where it's like, aha, this is something that we can look at. And it's like, no, again, you're wasting time. You're wasting time here. Let's see. YouTuber Missing Enigma talked extensively about Gary's past and postulated that there may have been some incidents that went unreported, and Joseph Jones could have been involved, hence his statement, "I should have done this 2 years ago." Yeah. So again, so Joseph, I'm glad you brought Joseph up again. That was one. Again, the book goes into a lot of detail about Joseph and that statement, "I should have done this 2 years ago." Again, the reader can kind of take from that what they will, but it kind of sounds like we're all on the same kind of wavelength here of thinking about how this was, the different theories that there are, and then what is most likely the scenario scenarios that could have possibly occurred. So as time passes, right, because it's been 45 years, family members of the men pass away without any answers on what actually happened, not just to their loved one, but to these 5 men. Again, these were not just 5 individuals. These were 5 individuals who were friends, who were connected, and were involved in the Gateway projects. They had, similar interests. They were on the same basketball team together. This was, again, such a hit to not just the individual family members, but I think to the community as well, because and when I say community, I mean community of the different friends, family, coworkers, the Gateway projects, support networks of these 5 men. Again, that's what happens, unfortunately, with a lot of these cases. And it's so heartbreaking when not only is somebody, taken from your life in such a heartbreaking and senseless way, but there's no answers. In law enforcement, 45 years later, you still don't have any answers. And Gary's family can't even lay him to rest. He's still not even been found. As time goes on, in the 1990s, we saw the internet come to exist. And what I liked about what Tony did was he laid out like the evolution of kind of what has gone on since the crime in regards to where we are now in 2024, basically. And he did a really excellent job in laying that out. I'm just paraphrasing here, but he does way better than I am here. So again, the internet came to exist. So now, again, with that coming into existence technology-wise, people were now able to go online and research and find out about things. By 2010, more resources were available online to researchers. So people were able to upload as well, newspaper articles from back then. Originals were able to be scanned and put online. I think we take for granted where we are now technology-wise, especially if you were born in the last 20, 25 years. People are a little bit spoiled because this is how it's always been for you, but it wasn't always like this, especially for people who were wanting to know more about these kind of cold cases, if you will. So think of where we are today, right? Podcasts. True crime podcasts are everywhere. So with that being said, cold cases that, might be on a law enforcement, on the shelf are now being discussed. And with people having more and more of an interest in true crime, for whatever reason somebody's into it, that now is getting these cases widely generated and talked about. And that's what happened in this case. And that's what's been happening in this case. Not only that, there's been documentaries and articles. So in the last 20 years, there has been so much more coverage about this case, but especially, I would say, like in the last 5 to 10 years, especially as we've seen the interest in, true crime documentaries and shows and podcasts just really kind of come into their own and just cover so much more and kind of get the word out there about so many unsolved cases. So the author has a whole chapter in the book on various plausible theories. And when I get to like a part in a book, typically from a true crime book that talks about that, sometimes it can be a little like you read it and you're just like, this isn't even possible. But I do have to say Tony Wright did an excellent job in talking about the different, plausible theories here. You actually read each one and you're thinking, that could have been it. And then you read the next one and you're like, that could have been it too. Nothing that he says is too wild and outlandish where it just doesn't make sense and would take the reader or somebody who's really interested in this crime, in what happened here, take them in like under just like a whole rabbit hole of somewhere where it doesn't need to go. That does not happen in this book. So excellent job, Tony, on doing that, keeping it to the reality of the situation, because it's not always like that in a lot of books. George says the Netflix program was outstanding. Have you watched the Netflix episode on the Yuba County Five? I personally have not. And the fact that you are both saying, one, you're asking if you've seen it, and then two, you're saying it was outstanding. I will watch it. I give you my word, I will watch it. So if you ever go back to any of my past episodes, I'm very, I don't want to say anti-Netflix, but I get very angry because a lot of times I see, especially when there are some cases that, I've studied for a really, really long time and I know a lot of the ins and outs details, and then a documentary will be made about it, or, some type of series will be made. And I get it. Netflix, it's a business and they're trying to get ratings, and are they making a entertaining show or special? Absolutely. But I get so frustrated and for any of you who are, again, who have heard this rant 1, 5, 20 times, and my apologies that you're going to hear it one more, but sometimes details of crimes themselves are so horrific. You don't need to add more to it. You don't need to sensationalize it. And a lot of times with a lot of the documentaries that I've seen, there's adding of details and of stuff that never happened in the case. And it's, doesn't make for a dramatic moment in the episode. Sure. Like if I was watching from an entertainment point of view, excellent episode. But when I watch it from the perspectives that I do, I just end up getting very angry and yelling at the TV because I'm like, that never happens. The details themselves are so horrific. You don't need to add to it. So I tend to kind of refrain from it. Sometimes people will ask me to do a review on a documentary, and then I will. But if you are saying it was outstanding, I will watch it. I will watch it. You got to stay away from blind alleys. Danny, I thought you didn't do unsolved cases. Kane, I said this at the beginning. Yes, I don't do unsolved cases, but where this was a book that I am reviewing, I figured best of both worlds. Best of both worlds. Give my review on the book and then talk about the case. Again, just summing it up because there's way more detail to this. So this is a little treat for you guys. It's a little bit of both. So see, you know me too well, Kane. So yes, so again, the author gives a lot of various theories on this. In one paragraph in particular in the book that stands out for me as I finished reading it, and then I'll get into my kind of overall thoughts on Tony Wright's book, was, again, the author says, quote, "We have no data or evidence to explain why the Yuba County Five vanished in the Plumas National Forest. Additionally, there was no concrete explanation as to why the men walked to the trailers near the Daniels Inc. campground and perished," end quote. That paragraph for me, and it wasn't it wasn't like the way that the book ended. There was more after that, but for some reason, when I read it, I kept going back to that paragraph, and it just stuck with me because it's just so spot on of, again, we don't have the answers to explain why this happened, why they went into that national forest, why they walked near the trailers, why they walked away from the vehicle. There's so many whys. And for me, that particular paragraph that Tony Wright says just really sums it up really, really nicely. So my overall thoughts on the book, after I just threw a whole lot of hour-and-a-half information at you guys. One, do I recommend this book? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Two, I mentioned it earlier on, but I want to make sure that it's stated again. This book is very unique for me in regards to, it is not only focused on the incident that happened, but it's so victim focused that you can tell Tony did a lot of work and research to not only give us who these five men were, but really, I felt when I was reading it with each chapter of each of the men, and the way that even woven throughout the book, outside of those individual chapters, he describes each of them. To me, reading, so I view it twofold. A lot of other true crime books where they talk about victims in books, a lot of times it's maybe a paragraph. And I'm not talking a paragraph per victim. It's a paragraph kind of compiling everybody into one. And then the rest is focused on, the attacker. There are some books that are very victim focused, like, again, Kathy Kleiner Rubins, she survived Ted Bundy. Kevin Sullivan, who's also a Ted Bundy author who I've had on here, and he has books that are multiple Bundy books where some are just on the victims. This is also one of those books that is very rare from that perspective of it's so victim focused. And I think it is much needed, and especially where true crime is going, it really needs to be more victim centered. And the author does an incredible job of this. I genuinely felt I knew each of these men reading it, like reading their stories. It wasn't just a name and it wasn't just a photo. I felt like I really knew them. I knew their quirks, their likes, their dislikes, like little details that never gets talked about in true crime books when it comes to the victims. And I can't stress that enough, because it was such a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of like the guts and gore that we typically read. Again, the book does an excellent job in covering the case and all of those details too, but it was mostly victim focused. And I can't speak enough about how much I enjoyed reading that and just feeling like I got to know these men. And I know at the beginning of the book, that was what the author had said he intended to do. When I say nailed it, it's just an understatement. He does an excellent job doing that. And I know I'm ranting about that, but excellent job. Another point of why I would recommend this book and what I really liked is not only did the author just go online and research these men, he took the time to connect with the families. And for me, that was so important, because as a reader, like he's going to do justice by what he's doing. And you read as the book goes on, there'd been so much time that had passed and so much distrust, in how the law enforcement initially handled the case, that not every family member was forthcoming in wanting to be a part of this and speak about their loved one in this. But Tony does an excellent job in making sure that the families knew, like, this is what this is going to be, and this is what I'm going to deliver. And he did that. And you get that sense of that. And there's so many quotes from, again, a lot of the family members here, George included. And it brings, again, that special and unique touch to it that a lot of other true crime books can't give. So George says, I so appreciated that Tony described them as individuals, not just the boys. Absolutely. Absolutely. He mentions early on in the book, George, about that's what they were known as, the boys, and then doesn't mention, I don't recall reading that quote anywhere else in the book. It was always always them as individuals. Absolutely. Let's see. Another reason that I recommend this book is, so reading this book, so there were times when I was, again, so frustrated reading it, thinking, seeing, for me, very clear missed opportunities from law enforcement. And I know, again, I'm not, Monday morning quarterback, going on the quarterback here. And for me to make that sports reference, I probably totally butchered it because I don't like sports, but y'all know where I'm going with this. It's easy to look after the fact and be like, you should have done this, you should have done that. But in this case, there were clear things law enforcement could have done and they didn't do. The ways that they were being described to the media, again, I'm like, not necessary. There were things where I'd read it and I'd get so angry, so angry. And then I'd kind of take a step back and say, the families still don't have answers. So many of the family members, again, 45 years have passed. Family members have passed away without getting any answers for their loved ones. The way true crime has taken off, after reading this, I'm like, I want to learn more. I want other podcasts that are covering this case. Those need to be, more widely out there, more research, more learned. Get this out there so that maybe, just maybe, there will be an answer. Even if it's 46 years later, 47 years, you know what I mean? Just something. Because we're seeing that happen with so many unsolved cases in one way or another. I just want so bad, when I finish this book, I'm like, I just want these families to have answers. Me as a reader, I just want these families to have answers. Just reading their struggles and just again, having to not only dealing with a loved one missing, but with a lot of the theories that were just so bizarre. And, especially I'm thinking Gary's family. Gary, just took a huge brunt of this. Jennifer, like you mentioned earlier, Gary just took, I just can't even imagine from his, his family's loved one missing and he's being blamed for it. And he's not even, there was just, again, so many areas where I was just like, oh my gosh, like, is there a way that, with social media now, that someone maybe knows something and there can be some answers, hopefully. And then the last note that I have in regards to why I would definitely recommend this book is that, and I touched upon it a little bit briefly a little while ago, is so the author, so Tony Wright clearly wanted to do right by the families, and it clearly shows. His heart and soul are in this book, and it clearly shows. It wasn't, you never once as a reader got the vibe that it's just, and there are so many true crime books out there where, not naming names, but we see it where it's just one more book about Jeffrey Dahmer, one more book about John Wayne Gacy, so, so on and so forth, where it's like, let's just, add more and more and more. And a lot of the humanity and compassion is just left out because it's just, let's add another and another. This book is not like that. You can tell it really comes from the author's, heart of wanting to do, really taking an interest in this case and wanting to do something about it and wanting to do right by the families and having the victims' families finally be able to say, this was my loved one. All the media heard back then was, that the 5 were missing, disabled individuals, and, the R word, which I hate that word, but that's what was being described as these were the men that was missing. People back then didn't get to know who these men were. And through this book, Tony does an excellent job of putting his heart in there to show, I'm going to do what I need to do to show you who Gary was, to show you who Jack was, to show you who Bill was, who Ted was, who Jackie was, to show you who all of them were. And he nails it, absolutely nails it. As Kane was so kind in pointing out, Danny, I thought you didn't do unsolved cases. I do read about unsolved cases, and I'm really glad I was able to, so thank you, Tony, that I was able to get this book and to read it and, give you guys my thoughts on it. And it's an absolutely excellent book, and I recommend it for anybody out there to read. It's, again, a lot of twists and turns in this, and a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of unanswered, frustrating questions. But I'm hoping when I close this book, I'm like, oh, I just want the families to get answers. This is 45 years is too long. It's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. But that's my hour and 45-minute review of this book. Does anybody have, I know on the East Coast it's a little late here. Does anybody have any questions or comments on anything, about the book or anything that I mentioned, or maybe that if you guys are familiar with the book that I didn't cover, that's worth pointing out. Let's see. I want to make sure I don't miss anybody's comments. James, was it you asking you? Oh, okay. Jennifer gave it 5 stars. It absolutely deserves 5 stars. Well, thank you. Cyrus says, the more I learn about the boys, the more I can relate to them on so many levels. That's very well said. Very well said. Might have been, I don't know what that's regarding. Yes, George. Yeah. So we did talk about that earlier. George, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Hi, Chrissy. I didn't know that. How did I not know that? We'll have to chat. Hi, Dennis girl. Wait, we'll have to rewatch. Oh, okay, awesome. Yes, let me know what you think. Leave a comment after you rewatch it. Sounds like everything that could go wrong went wrong. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's for me, it's very frustrating when it's from a law enforcement perspective, because you just think, like for me, I just think if they took those first 24 hours more seriously, could there have been answers? Especially when, again, when people go away from their their patterns. We all have those kind of structured patterns that we do throughout the day or whatnot, and when people steer away from that, it's worth checking into. And I just think law enforcement were quick to say, oh no, over 18, wait 24 hours and come back. And it's like, oh, you missed such a crucial moment, and that you can't get those back. Oh, thank you. No, thank you, George. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. But thank you for being here. Thank you, Royce. I appreciate that. Jennifer says, thank you so much for reviewing Tony's book and covering this case. No, thank you. Again, thank you to Tony. Thank you to Tony for this book. Absolutely excellent. And if anybody is here late and you didn't see the title or click the description, the book is Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright. And before I take off, in regards to where you can find this book, if you are interested, Amazon has it. They have quite a bit, so check there. If you go, I know some people have Barnes & Noble still in the area. I know I do, but not everybody does. But if you have a local Barnes & Noble, check to see if it's there, or check for them to order it there for you. And then most importantly, local bookstores, support local bookstores. If y'all have one, see if they can order this book for you, because again, always support local bookstores. But at the very least, Amazon. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, for this book review, again, of Things Aren't Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five by Tony Wright. And again, thank you, Tony, for the book. And if anybody's watching this after this live and you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below and I will get back to you on that. Other than that, later in the week, I will be doing my weekly True Crime and Chill. So stay tuned for that, where we talk about this week's current true crime cases. And then back next week, early next week, then I will be doing another case review. To be determined what I will be talking about then. Still not sure, but we'll figure it out. All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining me tonight. And until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.